CargoWise Landside is deeply committed to revolutionizing landside logistics. With a complete enterprise system built for modern trucking and container drayage operators that includes proven drayage transportation management, digital rate and quote management, real-time container track and tracing, and on-demand truck, trailer, and container storage. Excellence in container drayage starts with the right software. Enhance transportation management, optimize shipment execution, and improve intermodal business operations with Trinium TMS, Draymaster, GeoStamp Track, and SecureSpace. To learn more, please visit cargowise.com/landside.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of TPM Today. I'm Eric Johnson. I'm the Senior Technology Editor at the Journal of Commerce and also the host of this show every second and fourth Friday of every month. Really excited to be here with you. I feel like I am just recovering from TPM, which was last week. In some ways, it seems like a lifetime ago, but it was actually only about 9 days ago that we wrapped things up. It was an amazing event. Honestly, I've been going to this for 2 decades and a part of it since 2018. And this was the best one ever. We had record attendance, the timeliness and of news happening around tariffs, around a whole bunch of different elements hitting the industry right now. Couldn't have been more timely. A lot of energy. It was, in some ways, it was like a giant group therapy session for people involved in international trade. So really, thank you to everyone who made it the best edition of TPM ever. We'll talk more about this in future episodes, but again, thank you. It was one of those times where it was just exciting to be part of this industry and in that mix. So we're quickly at the Journal of Commerce. We're quickly on to our next event. So in 5 weeks, we'll be in New Orleans for our break bulk and project cargo conference. If you've never been to this before and you're in that space, highly encourage you to attend. Much smaller than TPM, but the right size, all the right players are in one room. I'll be there talking on a couple different sessions, one about tariffs, our topic today at TPM Today, and one about technology and how that's impacting the break bulk and project cargo industry. So definitely join us there. It's a fun event. It's just a really good sized, fun event. So definitely encourage you to be there. News of the week, a couple stories I wanted to highlight, both of which came out of TPM. So I ran a session around availability of ocean carrier APIs. So just going back in my memory banks here, about a decade ago, the idea of APIs, application programming interfaces, in the world of global logistics, no one who was not in software had ever heard this term before, right? This is not something that companies even thought about. Everyone used EDI, still uses EDI, if not more rudimentary forms of data exchange platforms. APIs have sort of become a thing in logistics over the last 10 years, but we talked in this session about how the ocean carriers that serve the market haven't really uniformly provided APIs around, especially tracking milestones, to the customers that need them. So we talked about why that is, why there's maybe disincentives to that, what other technologies may sort of have leapfrogged what APIs provide. I sort of summarized that in this story here. We just posted this yesterday. So if you're into the kind of nerdy aspects of kind of system connectivity and data exchange, I definitely encourage you to read that story. The next story was something we didn't actually have a session about this, but this was something that came up in multiple sessions, including that API session, was this idea that shippers, importers, especially, are increasingly investing in data warehousing capability. And what by that I mean, they are collecting all of their data, whether it's logistics and transportation data or data across their enterprise, and housing it in a data lake or some sort of data repository from which they can connect to different software vendors. They can use it as a sandbox to play around with different reporting tools. And it's really kind of the new way that shippers are thinking about connecting to software and data and even 3PL partners, and also the way they're thinking about how they can more easily try out all of the cool software that's in the market without it kind of impacting day-to-day operations. So this is a fascinating development. I'll be writing more about this, but definitely check this story out if you want to learn more about kind of where things are trending on that side of things. Enough about tech for the time being. The topic of the day and every day these days is tariffs. And I am delighted to have a longtime friend of mine as a guest this week. Matt Priest is the president and CEO of FDRA, the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. Matt, thanks so much for joining today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric. This should be fun in spite of the topic. I'd rather talk tech, but here we are. So let's get to it.
Yeah, we can only play the game that's been put out in front of us, right? So just really quickly, so people have some context, what is FDRA? What's your membership? What do you do?
Yeah, so we are an 81-year-old trade association based in Washington, D.C., just down the street from where you're located. And our job is to represent the industry and to bring the industry together in a collaborative space that allows us to really engage on advocacy, on problem solving, on data sharing and the like. Our members, as we represent 97% of the industry, are Nike and Adidas and Under Armour and Dick's Sporting Goods, but we also represent a number of small businesses and family-owned importers in particular. And so for us, we have the full depth and breadth of the footwear industry here in the United States.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so give us a snapshot. I don't think anybody is unaware that the tariffs are a big topic, not just in our world, but like in general. How's your membership dealing with the current sort of, I guess we can only call it like unstable situation when it comes to the application of tariffs, the revocation of tariff, the reapplication? How are they sort of managing this situation right now?
Yeah, they're managing it with great difficulty, Eric. I mean, from a sense that we already pay exorbitant duties. We've been paying them since 1930. And so we know full hand, like, right, we're on the front lines of how duties increase costs and how they shrink margins. And so we've been pushing against duties again since 1944, essentially. For us, though, it drives a lot of uncertainty because we are diversified somewhat, but unlike other product categories, we're not that diverse from a sourcing perspective. So we source about 95% of our shoes from just 3 countries, China, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And so while the majority of footwear comes from China, when I got this job 16 years ago, we were almost 90% of our volume came from China in the US. Now that number is 58%, and the value is about 35%. So we've come down out of our reliance on China. But the fact of the matter is, what's still left there is low value goods for working families that are sold here in the US. And the addition of 20% on top of a 48% duty. One of our duty categories is now 95% on kids' plastic shoes coming out of China. And so that's not sustainable. And the other problem is we pivot, and we've pivoted to Vietnam and Indonesia, and we're now pivoting to other countries. What is the plan around reciprocal tariffs? And so we have our eye on that process as well, and are actively engaged in trying to understand how that works and how our members can navigate it and still maintain profitability, to be honest with you.
So I definitely want to get into whether you are sensing this is going to spread to Southeast Asia, because obviously, as you mentioned, Southeast Asia has become a real powerhouse in terms of footwear manufacturing. If I look at all the Nike and Adidas boxes in my closet, I see more Vietnam than I see China, right? So, how, just stepping back a little bit, how did you prepare your membership for the likelihood of this sort of scenario over the last year? Was the scenario that we are now seeing, was that something that you foresaw to this extent, or, how did you sort of go through the process with them on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we started out basically with the understanding that as we headed into an election year, we went to our board in December 23, and we said, hey, we're heading into an election year. We need to make sure we have resources available on the advocacy front, in particular on the media engagement front, and to ensure that both the Biden White House and the whoever at that point would be the Republican nominee understand what our perspective is as an industry. And so as the campaign heated up and we saw kind of the candidates out there talking about trade in particular, we started to really read each of the tea leaves of each of the candidates and put that and help kind of guide our industry as to what our expectations were. We have experience in policymaking. I worked on Capitol Hill 20 years ago. I was a senior trade official in the Bush administration, the Commerce Department. And so we have experience to kind of navigate this. And then about a month before the election, we set up a transition team of our own internally. I was on a transition team in the Bush administration. So we set one up. And so as we went through that process, we started to engage with our members. So this is what's been proposed by the candidates. Depending on who wins, this is what we expect. And as the new administration is taking hold, we're really focused and been really connecting and conversating with our members this entire time to give them a heads up as to what the impact would be. And so clearly, as things have set in, the additional tariffs have set in, our consumers have started to really pull back. We can talk about that in more detail in a minute. But we were well positioned and well built. I tell our team internally, we're well built for a time like this because we have the experience. We really know how to communicate. We have our own podcast. We have our own weekly call with our members. We're firing on all cylinders right now because of the nature of the threat. And so that's how we plan to really guide our members through this process, and hopefully have become invaluable to the information flow that they think they need to be more successful in such a challenging environment.
So you touched on kind of like gauging what the new administration was going to bring in terms of potential tariffs with your members. What we are hearing, and at TPM, this was a something that came up in a few different conversations. I actually posted on it on LinkedIn yesterday, and it's gone absolutely crazy. Like obviously touched a nerve. This idea that the current administration is not super receptive to advocacy or lobbying efforts in a way that like maybe previous organizations or previous administrations that even superficially were maybe pro-US labor and against imports and maybe against trade, on a superficial level. Are the channels open with the people that you need them to be open with right now, or are they more closed than you would like them to be?
Yeah, so every administration, and I've served in this role this is my fourth administration essentially in this role. Every administration you have a different strategy to engage with them. Some are more traditional. The Obama team was way more traditional than some of the other administrations. If that makes sense. And so you have to always be kind of strategizing about how to communicate. This administration, as we saw in the first term, TV is really important. Getting on Fox and CNN and some of these other networks, CNBC, is really important. And so we've had the good fortune to be able to do that pretty continuously since inauguration and even before. And we've actually seen in real time the networks use my comments and directly ask some of the administration officials about our perspective to get their feedback of what their thinking is on these policy decisions. So that's been our strategy. I think with this administration, it's a bit different. You have a one-term president who's already served a term, but had obviously a break between the two terms. It's only happened one other time in our nation's history. And I think that was in the 19th century. So for us, it's a unique political dynamic, as well as that trade is such top of mind and such a top priority for this administration. Yeah. No matter where you fall in the tactics, I've never been a part or engaged with an administration that's been so heavily focused on trade at the top level. And so that has its own challenges, but it also has the benefits. And now the American public is fully aware of who pays the tariffs, in spite of what the administration says. When we do polling, even Republican voters, Democratic voters, independents, they all understand that they pay the tariffs. It's not the foreign country. So there's an educational opportunity we've been able to, I think, really leverage even during a time where our members are under stress and under threat.
Yeah, that's fascinating in terms of like using different tools to sort of like engage with the current administration. So you mentioned reciprocal tariffs. Can you for people who are not, may have heard about the tariffs, but may not have heard about this idea of looking at every single trade relationship we have in a reciprocal manner. Are they tariffing us? Are there non-tariff barriers that are preventing us from getting American-made goods into their markets? And how to use, I mean, how should we think about this? Is it practically achievable / enforceable if even if they could figure out how all of these sort of reciprocal tariffs would work? Is there capacity at CBP to actually enforce this? How are you sort of like, alerting your membership to this?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot. We've had a lot of conversations with our members about this and crunching numbers and pulling data in, particularly for critical countries that we export product out of and bring into the U.S. And so for us, it's trying to understand what that calculation is. We don't have a lot of line of sight as to how they're thinking about that. Will they do sector by sector, which is basically, take each chapter in the tariff code. We're chapter 64. Will there be a 64 tariff, if you will, that's applied to whatever the delta is between our import tariffs on footwear and the other countries' import tariffs on footwear? Well, that's cumbersome, but not as cumbersome if you were to do every single HTS line. Yeah. Or they're going to do an average consumer good rate where it's a little bit more advantageous for us, where a certain country has an average consumer good duty on imports and that hit our exports, and then in turn we figure out as a country what that difference is and we apply a tariff. We really don't know the thought process behind it. They did have public comment, which is a good thing, and we submitted comments on Tuesday of this week, and folks can read those on our website. But we really kind of engage with the administration in that way to try to just understand what they're thinking, but also lay the groundwork that we don't think footwear is a critical sector for the U.S. economy from a domestic production perspective. And so I think the Wall Street Journal also has reported that they don't expect a lot of high tariffs to come out of the reciprocal engagement because a lot of countries already have low tariffs as is for our exports, or they'll negotiate an outcome. And we've already seen the Vietnamese trade ministers in town this week to meet with officials in the administration to try to come to an agreement on some trade and energy proposals. And so there's some positivity there. Vietnam's our number one supplier, or number two supplier, number one in the athletic footwear space. But it all is a reminder to me that in the traditional administration in years gone by, Eric, you've had trade promotion authority and you've had presidents go out and they may in their minds think we're being treated unfairly or being mistreated, or we have a trade deficit with these countries, but they would go and negotiate a free trade agreement, either multilateral or bilateral, and then submit that agreement to Congress for an up or down vote without amendment. That's all gone now. And this administration, I think, is trying to accomplish some of the same goals that you would accomplish in a free trade agreement negotiation, which is lower duties, increased market access, lower non-tariff barriers, as you mentioned. But they're just doing it by, I guess, just essentially just punching people in the face to start and then seeing where they can kind of extract concessions out of that and then strike some kind of sector-specific deal. So it's way more complicated. And I don't know if they have the personnel, particularly USTR, to manage all these negotiations globally. There's only about 200 people at the agency, and it historically has very low approval ratings from its team because they work so hard. This is a lot of work to be doing for a team that's pretty small.
Yeah, fascinating. So where are we? I think there's been a lack of discussion about where this spreads next, right? There's been obviously a lot has been focused on our neighbors, Mexico, Canada. A lot has been focused on China coverage, I would say, and discussion about this. Now it's turning to the EU. There's been relatively little discussion about how this might spread to Vietnam, which is not just a huge, a sourcing nation in the footwear category, but across a bunch of different categories. Vietnam was the front lines of China Plus One.
Yeah.
Are you expecting at some point this to, Vietnam to come publicly under the sort of tariff regime or do you expect this to be sort of negotiated in a little more quiet manner and not get bubble up so publicly?
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit different perspective on it because I think Vietnam has been on the administration's watch list since the first term.
Okay.
There was a 301 investigation launched in December of 2020. I spoke at the hearing, and they were looking at potentially adding tariffs on Vietnam under the 301 regime. That was canceled by the Biden administration. They pretty much ran out of time.
These are the 301s, are the initial 25% that were levied on China, most Chinese imports in the first administration's term, right?
Yeah. 301 was that process. It hit footwear too. There were 4 lists that it started in 2017. We got hit in 2019. But then they were pivoting now because of a lot of that movement of production to Vietnam. They were pivoting to basically whack that mold, to use that analogy. So that's top of mind for us. The other thing that's top of mind is that in the public comment announcement, they highlighted they wanted companies who commented to focus in on, for the reciprocal tariff consideration, focus in on G20 countries with trade deficits. And so Vietnam's number 3, if China, Mexico, and Vietnam in that order. We're obviously already dealing with China and Vietnam, or China and Mexico, and these other fours, if you will. And so that's of concern to us. And we struggle with this whole trade deficit conversation because it's, we have more money than anywhere else in the world. We have more economic prowess than anyone else in the world. We're going to have trade deficits. Right. Someone likened this to, someone comes and mows my lawn, I pay that person to do it. I have a trade deficit with that person. Why do I want to go? Do I need to go wash his truck to balance it out? Am I getting a raw deal because I have a trade deficit? No, of course not. So it's a weird way to judge things, but they're in charge, and this is what's driving the conversation. So for us, any footwear producer, G20 country with a trade deficit is of concern to us during this process.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm glad you brought up that trade deficit issue, because I think that's also something that not a lot of people are kind of paying attention to as being a driver for some of this. All right, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
All right. Now there's a Simpsons where Homer says that, and he runs and plays a pinball machine called Devil's Advocate. So is that what you're going to do, or are you going to actually play Devil's Advocate?
No, I'm going to actually play Devil's Advocate. I'm not very good at pinball anyway.
Okay.
And I don't have that
Fair enough.
So, the trade community seems pretty bamboozled. On site at TPM, a lot of people were just sort of shaking their heads. A lot of forwarders that I spoke to on site, 50% or more of their conversations were revolving around this on site. Is there a chance that everyone who is sort of flummoxed by the tariffs has this wrong, and that this radical approach might work in the long run? Or is that something that you're sort of considering and talking through with your membership?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because I do, internally, I keep asking myself, because I want to be humble about it, right? We're pretty certain of where we fall in the facts, but we don't want to have blinders on to think that there's some golden ticket that's out there and there's paying to go and get it from on top of some mountain. But once you do get it, we're all gonna have a great life and the economy is gonna boom. So I want to be humble about it. So I'm thinking through about their pronouncements, and maybe there's a there. I think the challenge right now, Eric, for us is that we're seeing the consumer really pull back. And so I know the administration wants to move more of the economy's growth from government spending to private sector spending, right? We've had a ton of government spending with stimulus under the first administration of this administration, as well as the Biden administration. And so they're trying to move that into the private sector, and we'll talk about that very publicly. I think the challenge right now, and you'll hear analysts say, well, we got to play the long game. This is a long game thing. It's kind of the genesis of your question. Yeah. The consumer's been playing the long game for 2 or 3 years now. And so we've seen, just since inauguration, our sales have declined 13%. In the 4 weeks leading up to inauguration, we were up 13%. And so I can tell you, some of the biggest brands that are our members, who have been on fire for years, are seeing that slow down as well. They're telling that to me directly. I had a couple texts this morning. And so that's where we get concerned. We're a consumer-driven economy. So if you're trying to move growth into the private sector, but now you're hurting the private sector and taking away their spending power because you're going to drive up costs with tariffs, it's not going to solve itself. That's just going to be a vicious cycle. And so I think economic theory is interesting. I think the folks who run or part of this administration are smart people. I think they do want what's best in their minds for this country. But at the same time, our members are Main Street. They're literally engaging with people every day of all walks of life, every economic kind of profile you can think of. And everyone is hurting, and it's hurting very quickly. These things are happening very quickly. Now, they'll argue, in fairness to them, look, they're going to unleash permanent tax cuts on the American public and deregulation and drive down energy costs. And so will there be some opportunity there? Yeah, I think so. But in the meantime, it's super painful to push a country into a recession that didn't seem inevitable just a couple of weeks ago, and now it seems inevitable. So I think it's hard to have that patience, particularly where the consumer is so strapped. And then it's a political question because, consumers are fickle. Americans are fickle when it comes to these kind of pocketbook issues. You can only rely on their goodwill for so long and the mandate you've been given for so long before things go sideways, and they go sideways in election, a year from now. So we'll have to see. We seem to do this every 100 years where we jack up tariffs on our own people. And then the economy tanks and the party in power gets thrown out. So I don't know if that will happen again, but that's the history of kind of how when we've gone down this road and done these kind of things.
Yeah, great kind of perspective on that. I think one of the comments that came through on that LinkedIn post that I mentioned earlier was interesting that, is there a recognition that there are a lot of jobs tied with international trade and imports, right? Like there's distribution center jobs and coordination jobs and warehousing jobs and port jobs. And, those things are hurt when imports get sort of, constrained in some ways. So there's trade-offs with everything, right? Like there's no silver bullet. All right, we are rapidly running out of time. I probably have like 8 more questions for you, Matt, but we'll have to do this in a couple months and see if anything has changed. I guess we didn't even get to technology. I wanted to ask, is there anything, like maybe in 30 seconds, is there anything that you're seeing your members you turn to from a technology standpoint to help manage this? Or is this kind of good old fashioned customs brokers, trade attorneys, consultants who are kind of helping with tariff engineering and, sourcing kind of changes?
Yeah, I mean, we're in triage mode right now, so it's kind of hard to kind of reach that next new shiny technology opportunity unless you've already implemented it and you're fully aware of it. So I think it's kind of the old-fashioned tariff engineering. We're pros at tariff engineering because of our high duty burden for 30 years, or excuse me, for 100 years since 1930. So even those options are limited. But I think right now it's just like, again, triage,
failing water,
bleeding, see what we can do, right? Even shifting around, we've told now's not the time even to be running to Vietnam if you're in China because demand's gonna be spiking.
Yeah.
So it's hard when your house is on fire to all of a sudden decide to install smoke detectors.
Yeah, great analogy. There was actually a question that came in. I don't know if this is applicable. Is there any way China would want to or be able to transport the material through Vietnam to the U.S. without implying any tariffs? I suppose he means can production that's actually Chinese shift to Vietnam and sort of like get around the tariffs. That's part of that engineering kind of process. And my sense is the current administration is going to be hyper focused on identifying situations where they feel like companies are evading the spirit of what they're trying to do and not doing it by the letter of the law. So I would imagine consult a professional on this is all I can say. So don't try this at home.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically transshipment that you can do it legally. I mean, our supply chain gets elongated from China, Vietnam, but we are working to kind of bring back total kind of having all materials and labor and inputs in Vietnam. But there's also the illegal side of things where people mislabel, they ship it through, and there's no substantial transformation of the product. Therefore, it's still an Chinese origin good. And they would definitely don't like that, as they should. They shouldn't like that kind of transshipment.
Right. All right. 2 quick questions. I'm going to turn the tables on you. You asked when I was on your show a few years ago, it was a long time ago. You asked me what shoes I was wearing. So what shoes are you wearing?
Oh, good question. I love that. I'm wearing Saucony Jazzes. It's a Friday. It's casual Friday. So Saucony is one of my beloved members. They're owned by Wolverine Worldwide.
Yeah.
And
We
have
know the logistics director at Wolverine.
yeah, absolutely. And so I'm wearing the Jazz, which is an icon, one of their iconic shoes, old school retro. So that's what I'm wearing.
Nice. I have some Adidas on right now. So, well, they're on the side. I'm in my house. I don't wear my shoes in my house. So they're sitting right next to me. Last question. I asked this of every guest. Who's your favorite band or musician? And you have to tell me why.
Wow. Favorite band or musician. I bounce around between, I go through phases where I'm really into one band or the other. I could tell you, a lifelong Pearl Jam fan, seen them many times. The Dark Matter records, amazing. Their most recent record. I'm into 311. There's some Christian singer-songwriters I like. I like hip hop. I'm kind of above all the above kind of guy. So.
Yeah, everybody's got eccentric tastes. These are eclectic, not eccentric. Eclectic tastes. It's hard to find anyone who just likes one type of music anymore. So
yeah, I'm into vinyls right now, Eric. So I've got like Marvin Gaye and Johnny Cash and kind of old school vinyls. And I hunt them down over the internet and
nice.
I spin them just off my office here. So I love music and I love vinyls. And that's a question I love answering. No, I can't say that about the tariff questions, but that one I can answer happily. So I appreciate the question.
Cool. Matt, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I do a lot of posting and commenting there. You can go to our website, FDRA.org, and find more information there. We'd love to connect on LinkedIn, though. That's probably the best way to do it.
Cool. And Matt and FDRA do an awesome podcast, the Shoe In Show. So definitely catch that if you want to go into all things footwear. So Matt, thanks so much. This has been super helpful for me and hopefully for the audience as well.
My pleasure. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it, man.
Bye. Okay, far too much to talk about. We're already over, but hopefully that was worthwhile. Real quickly, dad joke of the week time. What did the doctor say when I broke my arm in 3 places? Stop going to those places. I thought that was like just perfect quintessential dad joke. Thank you to Matt. Really appreciate the conversation. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another awesome discussion with another expert to talk about all things global logistics and trade. Really appreciate everyone tuning in today. Hopefully you can navigate this crazy environment with a little bit of clarity and focus now. And have a great weekend, everyone. See you soon.